Steel sucker rods must be cared for very carefully. Bundles of steel rods being stored in the yard must be placed on 5 sills and be up off the ground. The sills must be placed directly under the packaging material in the rod bundles. Under no circumstances should steel sucker rods be stored on the ground. Stacked bundles of rods must be arranged so the packaging material from one bundle rests on the packaging material beneath it. The packaging material should never be offset, allowing it to rest on the rods in another bundle. Loose rods must also be stored up off the ground on racks. Use stripping material to keep the rods separated from one another in layers on the racks, and don't let the rods come into contact with one another. Loose rods need the same level of care as bundled rods. Moving rod bundles with gin pole trucks can be very dangerous. A typical bundle of rods may weigh over 4,000 pounds and must be handled carefully to avoid either damaging other equipment, the rods, or injuring personnel. When moving rod bundles with single-line equipment such as gin pole trucks, always assign someone to maintain control over the rod bundle. The rod bundle must not be allowed to swing or twist freely and must be kept as close to the ground as possible. The person controlling the bundle must always be behind the bundle when moving in the direction the load is traveling, to avoid the possibility of injury. Being in front of the load, or especially under it, may result in serious injury. Carrying single rods must also be done very carefully. One man carrying a single rod can put a long radius bend in the rod, permanently damaging the rod and thus causing it to fail. The proper procedure is for 2 men to handle the rod, each man being about 5 feet in from either end of the rod. Carry it level and watch your step. It's important to note here that you must always avoid bending steel sucker rods to the point of damaging them. All bent sucker rods fail, and all failures result in expensive repairs and lost production. Never run bent sucker rods into a well or try to straighten them. Transporting steel sucker rods also exposes them to possible damage from tie-downs. Tie-downs must always be placed on the packaging material, not on the rods themselves. Tie-downs placed directly on the rods will cause permanent damage to the rods, resulting in premature failure of the rods in the well. Loose rods are hard to haul without the use of a chain and boomer. Always place stripping material between the chain and boomer and the steel sucker rods. A chain or boomer placed directly on the rod will always cause damage to the rod. Transporting individual rods on headache racks can also damage steel sucker rods. Protective material must always be placed between the rod and the rack to prevent the rack from damaging the rod. Tying the rod to the rack with a chain will also cause serious damage by cutting into the surface of the steel rod. Always use a soft material such as a bungee cord or rope to secure the rod to the headache rack. If possible, use pump racks to haul single rods instead of a headache rack. It's also important to drive carefully and slowly when you have 1 or more steel sucker rods tied to the headache rack. Causing the rod to flex deeply can damage the rod and cause premature failure in the well. Steel sucker rods on location must be treated just like rods in the yard. Rods must be stored on at least 3 sills, 1 each under the end areas of the packaging material. Never stack the rods on the ground at a well site, even if you think they'll be there only a short time before they're run in the well. Loose rods on location must also be treated just like loose rods in the yard and be stored up off the ground. If several loose rods are going to be layered, then they must be separated by stripping material. Never lay loose rods on top of one another without protecting them from damage. It's also very important that 2 people unload loose rods from trucks. One person whipping loose rods from a truck onto a rack will nearly always damage steel sucker